particularly as he's hot off the plane from Hong Kong, Simon French and I would like to extend a particularly warm welcome to Christian Hogg, the CEO of Hutchison China Meditech. Welcome, Christian, to this new series that we have, Meet the CEO. You've been CEO of this incredibly innovative pharmaceutical operation since 2006, having joined Hutchison Lampert back in 2000, as I understand it, and previously that, a decade with Procter & Gamble, mainly in the US and then more recently in China. Hutchison China Meditech is an innovative biopharma company focused on the highly sophisticated and sought-after global oncology and immunology markets. The company has been a huge success since you took it over. Its share price in terms of UK terms has risen, as I roughly said, from 2006, from 250 pence to £18 and change on Friday. This is a phenomenal achievement. HCM can regard it quite reasonably in terms of revenue-generating pharma business. However, surely the key value opportunity is based upon the pipeline of drugs currently under development and the R&D effort which underpins this. I expect you'd want to highlight the innovation platform. When Simon asks you some questions about this business plan for the future, I think that'd be the best way of handling it. I understand that HCM's portfolio currently comprises of 7 clinical candidates in well over 20 studies worldwide. It may have changed since I read this anyway. More about that. Christian, by the way of introduction, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Firstly, in March of this year, you had a $100 million rights issue for NASDAQ purposes. Did you think in the years to come you might require another, as the pipeline competition for drugs is so incredibly competitive? Secondly, and this gives you time to sort of think about it, if that's okay, because of the incredibly powerful pedigree of your sister company, Hutchison Lampert, and your innovative success, the chances of you being taken over might be slim, despite the fact that many large pharmaceuticals are looking to buy companies that provide add-on value. So will you grow organically, or could you, in the right circumstances, be on the acquisitive trail?
Well, good questions. First of all, thanks very much for having me.
Huge pleasure.
Here today. I think the first question or answer on the NASDAQ listing that we completed in March of this year, that 100 million US is, I wouldn't call it a drop in the ocean when it comes to developing new drugs, but it's a relatively small fundraise for a company that's currently running 4 phase 3 clinical studies on 7 drug candidates, and by the beginning of next year we'll have another 3 phase 3 global registration studies underway. So it's a big portfolio of drugs that we're pushing, drug candidates that we're pushing through at the moment, and you know, we're almost a victim of our own success. Those clinical studies have been underway for now six years plus and have been succeeding. So the further you go, the bigger those studies get and the more expensive they become. So to answer your question, you know, will we need to raise more money in the future? I think there's a chance of it. Now, one thing that sets us apart from a lot of biopharmaceutical companies and early biotech companies is that we have a cash generative part of our business. We've got a very big pharmaceutical business in China that this year the guidance for net profit is somewhere between 63 and 66 million US after tax. So that business is generating a lot of cash and helping us fund a lot of our clinical development activities. So we've always set ourselves up to not be a binary biotech company, one that is completely dependent on equity capital markets for funding. We've set ourselves up to have a cash generative business that can fund us through the down cycles in the equity capital markets, which come quite regularly. And as a result, we do tend to go to equity capital markets when the time is right. But really, before this NASDAQ listing in March of this year, the last time we'd raised money on any market was back at our IPO on AIM in 2006. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we try to fund ourselves from one way or another. And the other area that we tend to generate and derive a lot of cash from is our partners. So we're partnered with AstraZeneca, with Eli Lilly, with Ortho McNeil Janssen, which is J&J's pharmaceutical division, and also Nestlé Health Science. Those partners are very big partners that bring both technical capability as well as cash to our programs. So I think no immediate plans to raise more money, but certainly we're not in a business where cash needs are small. So I wouldn't be surprised at some point down the line that we might consider that if the timing is right. Your second question about whether we're a takeout opportunity or what's our strategy, or an acquisitor. You know, one of the benefits of Hutchison Whampoa, which has now changed its name to CK Hutchison Holdings, is it's a very, very long-term investor. You know, CK Hutchison was there right at the beginning, 16 years ago, when we started out with a blank piece of paper. And, you know, from a mindset standpoint, they've been very straightforward the whole way. Never in a hurry to sell shares, never in a hurry to get out, only focused on long-term sensible investment and financial discipline. That's why we stand here today in a pretty good shape, because we've never taken crazy risks. We've always been very sensible. So Hutchison is a terrific major shareholder. I think their view is whatever's right for the business. You know, I don't think they're in a hurry to sell any shares. As I say, they've never sold any shares. But at the same time,
there's been no need to, though, has there?
There's been no need to. But also there's, you know, take for example the NASDAQ listing here. Hutchison diluted from around 67% down to 60% around that NASDAQ listing. So that was no problem because it was right for the business to raise those funds. So I think, you know, is it a barrier to a takeout if a big pharma came and wanted to acquire ChiMed down the road? I don't think so. I think Hutchison is very pragmatic, and you know, the right deal is the right deal. But at the same time, I don't think there's any interest in pursuing that, in going out looking for it. If our success in our clinical studies and our programs and approvals of our main drugs happens, and that becomes something of importance for Big Pharma to see us as a potential, then I'm sure we'd look at it, I'm sure. As far as us acquiring, it's a very expensive place, pharma, particularly in China, you know, because the Chinese market, you've got 20% of the world's patients, and you've got sort of 30% of the world's cancer patients in China. So most of Big Pharma is desperate to get a foothold in this market in China. You know, we've spent 16 years establishing a terrific business in that market, both in the oncology side on our pipeline as well as on our commercial side, where we have over 3,000 salespeople now in China, covering more than 300 cities and towns in China, detailing drugs in 16,000 hospitals in China. So it's a big commercial operation in China that has been growing very rapidly through those last few years. So I think that as I look at how to expand our business, I think there's 2 or 3 ways to do it efficiently. Number one is through expansion of our existing products. We have over 200 product licenses in China at the moment. Now, about 10 of those product licenses represent 90% of our profit. So there's a lot of room for expansion of what we've already got. The second area is the innovation. I mean, we've now put the best part of $400 million into pushing this pipeline forward over the last 10 plus 15 years. And if we're able to successfully get 2 or 3 of those drugs approved in the next 2 or 3 years,
shows on the road, isn't it?
That is enormous payback for that investment. If I were to go into the market and try to acquire oncology assets that have similar type potential, you'd pay a lot more.
The premium's massive, isn't it?
It's massive, it's massive. So I think, you know, we're a company that has created our own innovation, that's created our own pipeline. We're not necessarily out there looking to acquire stuff in China. One thing we have done, last year we did a deal with AstraZeneca where we took over the commercial rights of Seroquel, which is their bipolar disorder and schizophrenia drug. So now we perform all commercialization of Seroquel in China. We have now built a team of 150 medical reps going into the mental hospitals across China, detailing this drug to physicians in that area. So that's an area where we have sort of taken on new drugs through collaboration with partners. As Big Pharma tends to see China as an area where they're willing to invest in commercial operations in their core areas. So for AstraZeneca, that would be oncology, it would be respiratory disease, it would be cardiovascular disease. But central nervous system disease, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder is not a core area for Astra anymore. So they're willing to take that drug and hand it off to somebody else to do the commercialization. So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. More than answers it. Before I hand over to Simon, I think you've answered my other question, but I'll just say, it strikes me with 1.4 billion people in China that your marketing and your sales will be concentrated in that area. But in terms of development, you are global. Is that about right?
So all of our 7 drug candidates have been designed to be competitive in the global market. We're based in China, and there are competitive advantages by being based in China, but all of our innovation is focused on the global market. So, you know, the advantages of being based in China, the cost structures are generally lower, the patient populations are larger, so your ability to enroll clinical studies in China, it's faster, basically. There's more patients that don't have treatment options. The negatives, generally regulatory side is a bit slower than the US or Europe, but we've been there and doing this for so long, we figured it out in many areas. So I think that that's the way you should see us. We're a China-based company innovating for the global market.
Got it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, David. That's great. Christian, thank you and welcome. I just want to take you back to what was an undoubted success earlier in the year of the NASDAQ listing. I'd be keen to know what lessons you learned around translating what is a principally China-based business for US investors, because clearly there are some unfortunate examples where this hasn't been successful and the lack of reporting transparency has undermined the investment case. Yet you successfully got this away. What were the keys? What did you learn in terms of that journey?
Yeah, so there's a lot of cynicism around Chinese companies, and rightly so. There's been one failure after another, whether it's in the United States or the UK on AIM or in general on the London Stock Exchange. So we've always gone into this with a total focus on transparency and not being seen as a China company run by, you know, people with governance standards that are suboptimal. So I think that, you know, you look at our presentation materials, you look at our annual reports, it's all very, very detailed. More detailed, actually. We go overboard. We put more detail in there than probably most Western companies do, just because we have to compensate for a fundamental lack of trust in Chinese companies, driven by the failure of many of these companies that have come over. I think so transparency is one. I think communication is very important as well. You know, one of the reasons that we succeeded in the US is because we have a 10-year track record in the UK, mm-hmm. where, and believe me, it wasn't an easy start. We listed okay because AIM was doing pretty well in 2006, but then 2007, 2008, 2009, the crisis, it was very difficult for us. But we doubled down on the transparency, we doubled down on the communications, and really put a lot of effort into educating investors about what we are. And in doing that, we made promises. We didn't expect investors to come in and buy our shares on day one. We expected them to get to know us and gradually build their confidence in us and become shareholders in us. And that's what happened over a long period of time. We made promises, we delivered. We made promises, we delivered. Whether it's on our commercial business in China, which has grown sort of 15 to 20% a year for the last 10 plus years, yep. or on our innovation side, where, you know, when we first listed, the innovation was very much in its infancy, and then we did deals with AstraZeneca, and we did deals with Lilly and Nestle and J&J, and that gave a lot of credibility and validation to what we were doing.
Can I pick up on those joint ventures, which are very, very exciting? Is it too simplistic to describe the commercialization strategy as to Western markets as joint ventures, but scaling up on commercially independent venture in China? Is that a strategy at board level, or is that just where we've been thus far in the development journey of China?
So it's not that simple, but it's for the 80 for the 20, that's right. I mean, We have such a big commercial foundation and know-how in China. We can pretty much do whatever. You can see with Seroquel over the last year and a half, we've done extremely well. 40% up, 40% up versus when AstraZeneca was managing it in China. So we have the capability in China. When we launch those oncology innovations into the China market, we will do it ourselves. Now, AstraZeneca has the rights on savolitinib and Lilly has the rights on fruquintinib in China. We did those deals so we could bring in cash at that time. So we gave away those China rights back then 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. Looking forward, we will never hand over China rights again. We will only bring those China innovations to market ourselves in China. Outside of China, absolutely, partnering is the right way to go. I think that not forever. I think once we start launching drugs outside of China into the global market through partnerships, we will then eventually build up the capability to do it ourselves.
Yeah. You talk about those exciting launches coming down the line. You've got 4 phase 3 trials with potential approval in 2017. Which of those are you most excited? For shareholders not yet on the register and they're looking for a stimulus to take the share price higher, what should they be looking out for?
So 2017, particularly early 2017, is going to be a period of an enormous wave of clinical data coming out. Probably the biggest will be 2 drugs. Number one is savolitinib, which we're in partnership with AstraZeneca. We expect to be in 2 global phase 3 clinical trials on savolitinib early in the new year. One in an incurable type of kidney cancer and one in an incurable type of lung cancer. Both of which we believe have the possibility, based on the phase 2 data, of breakthrough therapy designation and as a result expedited, accelerated approvals under US FDA guidelines. Now, all of that will depend on the quality of the clinical data that we publish over the back end of this year, early next year, but we're hopeful. So that's big news. Breakthrough therapy designation, areas, indications of cancer that are untreatable, a molecular target, CMET, which is what savolitinib hits, that is, would be first in class, would be the first globally to hit this particular target. It's enormous. So if we're successful in those endeavors, I think that's a catalyst that will be very helpful to our valuation. The second one is fruquintinib with Eli Lilly. Now, we have a third-line colorectal cancer phase 3 study, a pivotal phase 3 study that completed enrollment in April, May of this year and will be ready to publish the top-line data very early next year. That will be the first pivotal phase 3 study, the first final registration study that we will have ever published, and potentially the first submission for approval in the middle of the year next year, obviously again contingent on the clinical data. So, our story is a good story. It's been a gradual build over many years. We've executed well in many ways, but ultimately the proof of the pudding comes in getting a drug approved and then launching it successfully. And that starts to play out over 2017 and into 2018. It's not just savolitinib with Astra and fruquintinib with Lilly. We also have sulfatinib and apitinib. These are 2 oncology drugs that we've got currently in 2 phase 3s in China and about to start a 3rd one in China early next year. Those are unpartnered assets that are playing out over the next couple of years as well.
And can you give some of the viewers an indication of the size of the prize with those things? We can go back to your H1 results, good set of results, $104 million of revenue, commercial revenues up 48% year on year. If some of this stuff comes to fruition, what's the quantum?
Well, savolitinib, the selective CMET inhibitor, I think you can safely say if we're able to be first in class, if we're able to be the first people to get a selective CMET inhibitor approved globally, it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity in terms of peak sales potential. Primarily in lung cancer, that's the big area. And it's actually very relevant to have AstraZeneca as our partner. They've just received approval on a drug called Tagrisso, which is a new targeted therapy that was actually the fastest ever, in my understanding, the fastest ever drug approval under the US FDA. From first in man to approval in 2 years, 8 months. because it hit such a unique target, molecular target, and provided patients that had just no other treatment options a very effective treatment. So we're in partnership with Astra in this particular area of lung cancer. They've just got an approval. Our savolitinib is being used in combination with Tagrisso in adjacent patient populations. So, yeah, I think savolitinib globally is certainly probably a over $2 billion peak sales drug in lung, gastric, and kidney cancer. I think fruquintinib, the Eli Lilly drug, is several $100 million of peak sales in China alone.
Very exciting.
Not taking into account the global potential of fruquintinib, which we're just about to start global clinical trials on.
Just for viewers' point of view, is this cure or palliative?
So none of these targeted therapies are going to cure anybody.
Right.
What they are going to do is they're going to extend the life of these patients.
Yep.
For depending on when you get approval. So, for example, fruquintinib, the VEGFR inhibitor with Eli Lilly, third-line colorectal cancer. These are patients that have failed 2 lines of chemotherapy. They have an average 5 months to live. All right, so they're very late-stage patients. But as a drug company, we go in after those patients because they're the most difficult to treat. They're the most obvious ones where you can see the benefit that the drug provides. You know, if you can extend that patient's median life, the average life of that patient population, to 8 months from 5 months, you're seeing the drug doing its work. Now, you might say, oh, 3 months, that's not really very much, but actually, that's the median. So some people, it'll be 2 years, some people, it'll be 1 month. But regardless, drug companies go after those very difficult patient populations because they're the fastest to treat. You see the results quickest. Once you get approval in those late-stage patients, you then bring the drug into earlier line treatment and extend life a lot longer. But ultimately, you know, you do get examples. We have a papillary renal cell carcinoma patient, which, as I said earlier, is an untreatable type of kidney cancer. We have a patient of that type in Australia who was one of the first patients on our phase 1 study on savolitinib over 3 years ago. 85% tumor shrinkage, living a normal life now. All right, so you get examples of that, but in general, you're going after these very sick patients to prove the drug has efficacy and that it works, it does what it's designed to do. Once it's approved in that difficult patient population, you bring it into earlier line treatment, and that very much broadens the market potential for that drug.
Got it.
I want to change gears slightly and move away from the business and towards the environment in which you're operating. And obviously, investors' attention is increasingly focusing on the US presidential election and the possibility, nay, probability now of a Clinton presidency. And it's been seen in some quarters as a negative for the healthcare biopharma sector. What's your own view on the impact both for the business and for the sector?
Well, I think last week it was a bit of a negative on the biotech sector. I think it was down 6% on NASDAQ last week as an overall sector. I think there's always going to be pricing pressure on this kind of innovation. You've got a lot of examples of extremely expensive drugs getting approved, you know, $140,000 a year to be on some of these targeted therapies. This is a pretty high price to pay. But I think from my standpoint, I always go back to innovation, and I always go back to meeting unmet medical needs of patients. You know, ultimately, that's what we're all about, is to try and find solutions to a lot of these big problems. Where pricing plays out, ultimately the market will decide, the political environment will decide. And, you know, there's no doubt that, I just mentioned earlier in this interview, we'd put $400 million US into, and this is cash, into our pipeline over the last 10 plus years. You know, that's an enormous investment, and we're not even close to being finished. So I think there is always going to be a balance between the massive investment necessary to get drugs to approval, the quite high levels of risk associated with getting those drugs approved. You know, it's binary often. You succeed or you don't. Yep. You lose it all or you don't, you know. And so I think it's always going to be a balance. And, you know, I don't I don't worry too much about the weekly swings in political political situation. I more worry about the longer term. Are the dollars that we're putting into these clinical trials gonna succeed? Because ultimately, if we are successful in several of these drug candidates, the pricing of those drug candidates, that will have an effect on the economic value of those drug candidates to us and our investors, but the fact that we've succeeded is the biggest.
Yes.
And ultimately, that's what matters.
And the amount, I mean, in my own view, the amount of investment that this sector is putting into the real economy at a time when politicians are desperately trying to get the corporate sector to get off their cash piles and invest it in jobs and research and development, I mean, makes a compelling case in the medium term for politicians to step back from some of the rhetoric.
And let's be a little bit cynical as well. She's trying to win an election.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to move on to you as the CEO. What were the big inspirations for you as you began and as you've gone through your leadership journey? Who or what really has influenced your style?
It's a good question. I've never really, to be honest, I've never spent much time thinking about it. Too busy.
Absolutely.
You get asked it.
I think you always go back to your father, basically. My father was a successful businessman up in the borders of Scotland, had a knitwear factory making cashmere sweaters. It's an industry that doesn't much exist anymore, but you know, he had a factory with 300 people working for him, making these things and shipping them all over the world, and that inspired me. I worked in that factory as a child, not as a child labourer, as a young man, and I just saw the families that were being supported by his endeavours, you know, and that inspired me. I thought, you know, you've got to contribute in that fashion, and so. Almost from day one, I wanted to go into business. I started at Edinburgh in civil engineering and got my degree, but then went to America to get an MBA and soon was working for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati in their global headquarters. And I always just wanted to get into business. And then they sent me to China. And I got to know Hutchison because they were Procter & Gamble's joint venture partner in China. And so one thing led to another. Hutch came to me and asked me to get involved in and start this business 16 years ago. And one thing led to another as we built up over the years. And I think I've always been drawn to people that I can learn from. So Procter & Gamble was a good starting point, but Hutchison is a different animal, and very entrepreneurial, very very effective in their business operations, and I've learned a great deal from many of the people I've dealt with and worked with within Hutchison through the years.
They're sensible risk takers, aren't they?
Well,
or is that not a terminology you like?
No, I think Hutchison are just a very, very entrepreneurial group of people and very sensible and very financially pragmatic. You know, our business was always going to be a long-term investment. It was always going to be a lot of money. But we never started out with a blank check from Li Ka-shing. It was always, look, build a business that on the one hand can generate cash to help fund you innovation or fund the innovation activity that's going to be long-term and going to take forever and be very risky. And, you know, I think I would not have set it up that way if it had not been for Hutchison's, you know, guidance during that time. So I've learned a lot from them. I think our business is a lot stronger as a result of that. And yeah, that's how I've evolved as an individual. Is you know, fortunately being around people that are of very high caliber and have helped me, and that extends to the people beneath me as well. I have now, you know, the good fortune to be running a team of over 330 scientists and staff in Shanghai who are the best and brightest the people that exist in this field.
And that's where I want to kind of draw this to a conclusion. And one of the things I've reflected on the interviews we've done thus far, and you're no different, is that the best CEOs recognise the quality of the people underneath them is absolutely inherent to the success of their business. And therefore my question is, outside the obvious technical expertise that you need to be successful in your line of work, what are the other things that you look when you're employing your top team, your executives, that reflect the values that you try and, you know, embalm across the group?
Well, I really look for people that are self-starters. You know, ultimately, I can't be managing everything for everybody. I need people that are going to be capable, that are going to be experienced, specific experience, not general experience, specific experience, but then are going to be self-starters who are going to go make it happen, who are going to be good communicators, who are going to explain to me what they're doing and why they're doing it, and you know, giving us the targets and meeting those targets. So that's what I look for, and generally that's just a mature type of individual, somebody that knows what they're doing and is able to take a bit of the load off of me. Because I mean, you know, on the scientific side, we have a big organization, but on the commercial side, we've got 3,000 people. And, you know, we need people there that really know what they're doing and have discipline. And so that's the kind of person I look for when I hire senior management. A senior management team is mature, very experienced, self-starting, and, you know, with a passion. I mean, that ultimately we all show up to work every day, and we're on a mission to try to be the first Chinese company in history to bring a drug innovation from discovery all the way through to global approval. It has never happened in the history of China. It has never happened. And we have several shots at this. Mm-hmm. So that's what we are all working towards. Myself, my stakeholders, my team underneath, we're all working towards that with total focus and total commitment, and we'll get there, I'm sure of it.
And that's a fantastic way to wrap it up. Christian Hogg, Chief Executive Officer of China Meditech, thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Absolutely brilliant, lovely.
Thanks a lot.